as a result of the even more massive debts created during the Second World War, and after 200 years of compound interest at work. The world's national debts were now so ridiculously large that supranational banking institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank had to be created in order to regulate a situation where millions and billions and trillions were being made and lost in accordance with predetermined and eventually fully computerized mathematical formulas. Inflation had come of age. Clearly, one of the greatest dangers to the Freemasonic banking system was, and is that too many people would ask for too much paper money at the same time. Although endless amounts of more paper money could easily be printed, with every large numeral being printed on each individual piece of paper to represent its face value if necessary. There was always the danger that the general public would see through the illusion and realize that however large the number which had been printed on the note, it still was not really worth a penny. It was only by having a carefully regulated flow of paper money, not too plentiful and not too scarce, that the illusion of normality and business as usual could be sustained and maintained. After all, very few people whose wealth was tied up in the banking system could bear the thought of the fragile web being blown away, of the whole system collapsing, of their discovering that their tens, or their hundreds, or their thousands, or even their millions or billions or trillions, were all equally worthless. In order to regulate the supply and demand difficulty, and to keep the now fluctuating value of money within what appeared to be reasonable limits, people like John Maynard Keynes came up with new theories of economics, which were in keeping with the new paper-based, interest-inflated currencies of the world, and which were designed to replace the Victorian theories of laissez-faire, which could only and had only worked in a situation where real money, gold and silver with inherent value, was being used. Basically, Keynes drew people's attention to the fact that the demand for paper money in the hand could be regulated by making spending and saving either more or less attractive, by raising or lowering the bank rate, that is, the rate at which interest would be charged on loans and paid out on savings deposits. Put very simply, the higher the rate, the more it costs to borrow, and the more interest you will receive on your savings deposits. Accordingly, high interest rates encourage people to borrow less, spend less, and save more. Conversely, low interest rates encourage people to borrow more, and therefore spend more, and to save less, because if money is not going to grow very quickly, you might as well spend it. In effect, Keynes's theories of economics appeared to achieve two things. Firstly, when applied to the producer-consumer process, they were used to regulate the pace and extent of business activity by making it more or less profitable and therefore possible. Secondly, they were used to regulate the demand for paper money by regulating the pace and extent of borrowing and saving and therefore of spending. Today, there has been a further development in the international banking system's strategy to ensure that not too many people ask for money, which does not even exist in paper form, but only in computer memory at the same time. Basically, they are attempting to make it unnecessary to have money at all. This has been done by encouraging not only check transactions, but also the increasing use of plastic card transactions. The way that the plastic card transaction works is that when you produce your plastic card, which contains information as to your identity, together with the bank's guarantee that it will honor your financial commitments incurred by using that card, then a record of that information is made and sent to the bank together with the relevant details of the transaction, and the bank debits your account and credits the account of the person from whom, for example, you have bought the goods. In this kind of transaction, no money passes hands. All that happens is that figures are moved from one field to another in the banking network computer database memory. As more and more of these transactions occur and become commonplace, paper money increasingly ceases to have relevance. If this way of transacting is carried out to its ultimate and logical extent, then eventually, there will be hardly any demand for paper money at all. Because virtually all transactions will be carried out via the plastic card, and the monetary result recorded in the bank's computer, a plus here and a minus there, and of course, with a little nibble here and a little nibble there for the bank, which not only charges the buyer interest on whatever has been borrowed in order to complete the transaction, but which also charges the seller a percentage of the total amount of any given transaction. This trend, assisted by the widespread use of direct debit and direct credit facilities, has been reflected in England. For example, by the fact that since 1986 people have no longer had the right to be paid in the coin of the realm, which up until the mid-19th century used to be predominantly gold and silver, rather than paper, until, as we have already seen, the gold and silver were withdrawn from circulation, and paper introduced instead. Now that an employer is no longer obliged to pay employees in the paper of the realm, this means that employees can be paid either by check or by a direct credit to the employee bank account, instead of in cash. In other words, virtually everyone in England now needs to have a bank account in order to have access to their pay. In other words, virtually everyone in the country now relies on the banking system. The general aim is to eventually have the plastic card system operating throughout the world, because that will mean that virtually everyone is dependent on the banking system. And that will mean that everyone is that more easy to control. If, for example, all your wealth is stored in your banked computer database, then it can be frozen at the touch of a button. Or deductions can be made at source in compliance with, for example, a court order. In other words, if you value your money, then you will have to behave. Conversely, on the other side of the coin, so to speak, this is why today's bank robber no longer needs a balaclava, a gun, and getaway car, but rather a computer, a modem, and the software and ability needed to hack into and out of the banking network computer system. If this trend within the banking system continues along its way, then by the 21st century, most people's credit cards will be their identity cards. Everyone's personal details will be on the computer, their income and expenditure subject to assessment and analysis, their credit rating monitored, even their movements recorded via the bank computer record of the DMS and places where their plastic cards have been used. And of course, everyone will be encouraged to spend more than they actually have, to be constantly in debt, just like whatever government they may choose to elect, which, whatever the state of the balance of payments, will always have a growing national debt to service, as long as the system lasts. And as the different computer databases increase their interlink capacity, re-banking database, the TV license database, the house owner database, the car owner database, the electricity, gas, and water supplies databases, the telephone database, the various social benefits databases, the electoral roll database, the various police records and national security databases, to name but a few, then perhaps the scenario envisaged in George Orwell's 1984 will not seem quite as far-fetched as when the book was first published in 1949, or even as when the year 1984 itself came and went, with the New World Order still, at that point, to be publicly announced. We see, therefore, that the influence of the kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system, through its international banking system, has almost reached the stage where paper money is not only worthless, because everyone now depends on the banks for their services in conducting their financial transactions. The banks themselves have become the medium of exchange, and now virtually every transaction can be done with a piece of plastic, or over the telephone, or on the internet. Paper money has almost become redundant. And as the internet becomes more established, financial transactions are becoming even more tenuous and even less physical than ever before. If you use the internet to make a purchase, then you do not even have to hand your credit card over to another person to be swiped or sign the receipt. You do not even have to talk to a person over the telephone to give them your credit card number, expiry date, and security code. All it needs is a few taps on your computer keyboard, a few clicks on your mouse, and goods can be advertised or purchased, bills paid or sent, stocks and shares bought or sold, and fortunes made or lost. And if free power supply, which makes it all possible for this fragile web to function, is suddenly cut, then what? Allah is the power which powers the power supply. There is no strength and no power except from Allah. It is on usury that the new world order is based. And since it is based on usury, it is bound to collapse, because usury is forbidden. And because Allah and His Messenger have declared war on usury. O you who believe, fear Allah, and give up what remains to you of usury if you are indeed believers. If you do not, then take notice of war from Allah and His Messenger. Quran, Surat al-Baqarah, 278-279. Who has ever been at war with Allah and His Messenger? May the blessings and peace of Allah be on him, and won? And even if there were no war on usury, all things must pass. People in a kafir society are not only maneuvered into needing the banking system, but, as we have already seen, they are also encouraged to spend more than they have, and accordingly to become indebted to the various financial institutions, especially the banks. This ensures continued dependence on the Freemasonic-controlled kafir banking system, whether by the man in the street at his local branch, or by the government of a country at its central bank, or at the World Bank or the IMF. It is at this stage that the actual extent of the indebtedness is seen to be irrelevant. After all, it only exisms in the computer. What is significant is the actual extent of the dependence on the banking system, for the greater the dependence on it, the greater the manipulation control it exercises. And accordingly, the greater is the influence of the kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system, for the world. The degree and significance of that control and that influence can be measured by the fact that if you merely close down all the banks for a little while, or rather, if you just turned off the banking computer network, then the whole consumer-producer process, as we know it today, would collapse. And then it would be time for the next world order. The aim of the Freemasons is to perfect the kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system, by involving everyone in the producer-consumer process, as far as their work and consumption of goods is concerned, whilst ensuring the smooth running and overall balance of activity in that process. By having everyone and every business concern dependent on their banking system. Lane effect, they wish to arrive at the stage where the people of the world are completely caught up in one synchronized and unified field of activity, that is, economic activity. If this aim were to be achieved, there would of course be only one currency, which would not even take the form of paper money, but which would be identified solely in terms of computer credits and debits. Ideally, everyone would have their basic needs taken care of, but of course some world have them taken care of better than others. And the Freemasonic ruling elite would have them taken care of best of all, as has always been the case. This would mean that everyone would be relatively comfortable in the Freemasonic idea of paradise now on earth, made fact. But they would be completely unprepared for what comes after death. Fortunately, we know from Quran and the Hadith that this illusory dream will never be realized. The New World Order is doomed to fail. There will inevitably be a collapse in the kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system, before the Freemasons' ideal can ever be made to happen. The social decay which accompanies the way in which the system operates means that the people who are most exploited by the system will cease to play the consumer-producer game long. Before this dream of a unified global economic pyramid can be realized. The point in time is bound to be reached when enough people realize that the money in their pockets and the money recorded in the computer memory, whether the figures are plus or minus, is absolutely worthless. This will mean that they will cease to become dependent on the kafir banking system, and this will happen long before Irion has been issued with their plastic economic identity cards. Most important of all is the fact that the present resurgence of Islam means that more and more people are severing connections with the kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system, and are accordingly ceasing to be wrapped by the system. The more people cease to give reality to the system, the more it ceases to exist. As the number of real Muslims grows, and as they begin to reunite, so the controllers of the Dajjal system will try to wipe them out. These attempts will find their most extreme expression when Dajjal the individual has appeared and leads his army against the Muslims who have gathered around the Mahdi. This final and ultimate conflict between the two opposers, Kufr and Iman, which is referred to in other writings as Armageddon or Har Megiddon, will result in the death of Dajjal the individual and his followers, and indeed of the whole Dajjal system. Thanks to the reappearance and intervention of the Prophet Jesus, on whom be peace, the period of unified and peaceful Muslim rule, in accordance with what is in the Quran and the Sunnah under the Mahdi, the rightly guided leader of the Muslims, will then commence. This will be the next world order. The Mu'min understanding of the nature of money is utterly opposite that of the kafir system of economics. This is because it is based on an understanding of the true nature of existence. The Mu'min knows that only Allah exists, although this knowing differs from person to person. Some know it intellectually and others know it through direct witnessing. It follows that the Mu'min knows that since money does not really exist, it is worth nothing, right from the start. To the Mu'min, money is just a medium of exchange, but not a commodity in itself. There is thus absolutely no point in hanging on to it whatsoever.